Hello and welcome to Insomniac Histories. Imagine standing at the base of a towering sandstone cliff in the American Southwest. The sun is setting, painting the rock walls in shades of orange, red, and gold. As your eyes adjust to the shadows, you suddenly notice something extraordinary. There, tucked into a massive alcove high up the cliff face, is an entire city. Multi-story stone buildings with hundreds of rooms, round ceremonial chambers and plazas, all built with remarkable precision into the natural shelter of the cliff. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the desert evening. This city is silent, utterly silent. No smoke rises from the hearths. No voices echo from the chambers. No children play in the plazas. The city is empty, abandoned, as if its inhabitants simply vanished one day, leaving behind their homes, their pottery, their tools, and their stories. This is Mesa Verde, and it is just one of thousands of sites left behind by a people the Navajo would later call the Anasazi, the Ancient Ones. For over 1,000 years, they built a remarkable civilization in one of the harshest environments on Earth. And then, in the late 13th century, they disappeared. Tonight, we will explore the world of the Anasazi, a name now more respectfully called the Ancestral Puebloans. We will trace their rise from humble beginnings to the construction of architectural marvels that still astound us today. We will live in their cliff dwellings, participate in their ceremonies, and finally, we will confront the haunting mystery of their disappearance. This is a story of adaptation and ingenuity, of a people who learned to thrive in an unforgiving landscape. But it is also a story of vulnerability, of how even the most successful civilizations can be brought low by forces beyond their control. But before we begin our journey into the ancient Southwest, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It's a simple and wonderful way to support the channel, and it means a great deal to me. I'm also always curious to know where in the world and at what time you're joining me tonight. So I'd really love to hear from you in the comments. And now, settle in. Let the noise of the modern world fade away and let us travel back to a time of cliff palaces, sacred kivas, and a civilization that vanished into the desert wind. Our story begins in a landscape that seems designed to reject human habitation. The Four Corners region, where the modern states of Colorado, Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico meet, is a land of extremes. It is high desert plateau country, most of it between 5,000 and 8,000 feet above sea level. The landscape is dominated by vast mesas, flat-top mountains with steep sides, separated by deep canyons carved over millions of years by water and wind. The rock itself tells a story written in layers of sedimentary stone, red sandstone, white limestone, and bands of shale, stacked like pages in a geological book. The climate is harsh and unforgiving. Summers are brutally hot, with temperatures often exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Winters are bitterly cold, with heavy snowfall at higher elevations. But the greatest challenge is water, or rather, the lack of it. This is an arid land, receiving only 10 to 15 inches of rain per year, far less than is needed for most agriculture. What rain does fall comes primarily in two seasons: winter snows and summer monsoons. The summer rains are dramatic, violent thunderstorms that dump water in short, intense bursts. The water runs off quickly, carving arroyos and flash floods through the canyons. Very little soaks into the sandy soil. In this seemingly inhospitable environment, humans have lived for more than 12,000 years. But it was not until around 1500 BC that people began to settle down, to build permanent homes, and to experiment with agriculture. These early inhabitants, known to archaeologists as the basket maker people, lived in small pit houses, semi-subterranean dwellings dug into the ground and covered with roofs of branches and mud. They were called basket makers because of their extraordinary skill in weaving baskets from plant fibers. These baskets were so tightly woven they could hold water. The basket makers grew small plots of corn, squash, and beans, the three sisters that would become the foundation of southwestern agriculture. But they also continued to hunt and gather wild plants, supplementing their crops with the resources of the land. Over the centuries, these people developed more sophisticated techniques for survival in this challenging environment. They learned to read the landscape, to find the springs and seeps where water emerged from the rock. They learned which plants were edible, which had medicinal properties, and which could be used for fiber and construction. They learned to predict the weather by observing the clouds, the behavior of animals, and the position of the stars. And crucially, they learned to store water and food against the inevitable times of scarcity. Around 700 AD, a transformation began. The basket maker culture evolved into what archaeologists call the Pueblo period. The name comes from the Spanish word for village, reflecting the fact that these people built above-ground masonry structures rather than pit houses. The early Puebloans began to construct their homes from stone and adobe, sun-dried mud brick. They built small villages of connected rooms, the beginnings of the great pueblos that would come later. And they began to build kivas, circular ceremonial chambers that evolved from the earlier pit houses but now served primarily religious rather than residential functions. The population grew steadily. Agricultural techniques improved. The people developed sophisticated methods of dry farming, agriculture practiced without irrigation in regions of low rainfall. They built check dams in the arroyos to slow the runoff from summer storms, allowing the water to soak into small fields. They created stone terraces on hillsides to trap soil and moisture. They planted their corn in the bottomlands of washes where underground moisture would sustain the plants through dry periods. And they developed strains of corn specially adapted to this environment, varieties that could grow quickly and tolerate drought. By 900 AD, the ancestral Puebloan civilization was flourishing. The population had grown to perhaps 20,000 people spread across the Four Corners region, and they were about to enter their golden age, the period from roughly 1000 to 1300 AD that archaeologists called the Pueblo III period. This was the time of the great houses, the monumental architecture that still awes visitors today. Let us step into this world at its height, around the year 1100 AD. Imagine that you are a member of a family living in Chaco Canyon, the great center of ancestral Puebloan civilization. Chaco Canyon is a broad, arid valley in northwestern New Mexico, a place that seems an unlikely location for a major city. It receives only about 8 inches of rain per year, barely enough to support agriculture. Yet this is where the ancestral Puebloans chose to build their most impressive monuments. You live in Pueblo Bonito, the largest of the great houses in Chaco Canyon. This is not just a building. It is a massive, carefully planned complex that took over 150 years to construct. Pueblo Bonito rises up to 4 stories tall in places, contains more than 600 rooms, and includes at least 40 kivas. The structure forms a D shape, with the straight back wall running for more than 500 feet. The entire complex covers about 3 acres. To build Pueblo Bonito required an enormous investment of labor and resources. The walls are constructed with a sophisticated masonry technique. The outer faces are made of carefully shaped sandstone blocks, fitted together with minimal mortar. The interior of the wall is filled with rubble and adobe. The result is a wall that is both strong and well insulated against the desert's temperature extremes. But the most remarkable aspect of Pueblo Bonito's construction is the timber. The great kivas and the roof systems required massive wooden beams, vigas, to support the weight of multiple stories and earth-covered roofs. But there are no large trees in Chaco Canyon. The nearest forests are in the Chusca Mountains, more than 50 miles away. Archaeologists have used tree ring dating to determine that more than 200,000 wooden beams were carried from those distant mountains to Chaco Canyon, transported entirely by human muscle power. There were no wheels, no horses, no pack animals. Men carried these beams, some weighing hundreds of pounds and measuring 16 feet long, across more than 50 miles of desert terrain. The effort required is almost beyond comprehension, and it speaks to the central importance of Chaco Canyon in the ancestral Puebloan world. Your family occupies several rooms in Pueblo Bonito. The rooms are small by modern standards, perhaps 8 by 10 feet, with low ceilings. There are no windows, only a small doorway that you must stoop to enter. Light comes from the doorway and from a small fire in the corner. The walls are smooth, plastered with adobe and sometimes painted with simple geometric designs. The floor is hard-packed earth, covered with woven mats. Your possessions are few but precious. There are pottery vessels of various sizes, some for cooking, others for storage, and some beautiful painted ceramics used for ceremonies and special occasions. There are woven baskets, stone tools for grinding corn, bone needles for sewing, and blankets woven from cotton and turkey feathers for warmth. In one corner is a small collection of objects that represent your family's connection to the broader world. Seashells from the Pacific coast, more than 500 miles away. Copper bells from Mesoamerica, more than 1,200 miles to the south. And brilliant macaw feathers from the tropical regions of Mexico. These exotic items were obtained through trade, evidence that Chaco Canyon was the center of a vast network of exchange that stretched across much of the Southwest and beyond. Your day begins before dawn. You step outside into the cool morning air. The sky is beginning to lighten in the east, and you can see the silhouettes of the canyon walls rising on either side. The plaza of Pueblo Bonito is already stirring with activity. Women are emerging from their rooms, heading to the central plaza to grind corn. The grinding of corn is communal work, and it is accompanied by songs that help maintain the rhythm of the grinding stones. You join a group of women at the grinding bins, large stone troughs that hold the corn. You kneel before your metate, a large flat grinding stone set at an angle. You place a handful of dried corn kernels on the stone and begin to grind, pushing a smaller stone, the mano, back and forth across the corn with both hands. The work is hard and repetitive. Your shoulders and back begin to ache. The rhythmic scraping of stone on stone fills the air, along with the women's songs. This is how corn is transformed into flour, the foundation of almost every meal. It can take hours to grind enough flour for a single day's bread. The grinding wears down not just the stone, but also the women's teeth. Archaeological studies of ancestral Puebloan skeletons show that women who did most of the grinding had severely worn teeth, often ground down nearly to the gum line, a painful condition that would have made eating difficult in later life. As the sun rises, the plaza becomes busier. Men are preparing for the day's work. Some will go to the fields to tend the crops. Others will work on construction, as Pueblo Bonito is always being expanded and improved. Still others will hunt or gather wild plants to supplement the cultivated food. The fields are scattered across the canyon floor and on the mesa tops above. The ancestral Puebloans have built an elaborate system of water control. Stone-lined ditches channel runoff from summer storms to the fields. Low stone walls create grid systems that slow the water and trap sediment, gradually building up the soil. Every drop of water is precious and must be carefully managed. The main crops are corn, beans, and squash. The corn is planted in small clusters, each cluster forming a small mound. When the plants grow, their roots help hold the soil and moisture. The beans are planted near the corn. As they grow, they climb the corn stalks, and their roots add nitrogen to the soil, helping the corn grow. The squash is planted around the base of the corn and beans. Its large leaves shade the ground, reducing evaporation and discouraging weeds. This companion planting is an ingenious system that maximizes the productivity of the limited farmland. You also gather wild plants. In the spring, you collect tender shoots of grasses and the young pods of mesquite trees. In the summer, you harvest the fruits of prickly pear cactus and yucca. In the fall, you gather pine nuts from the pinon trees that grow on the higher mesas. These wild foods are an essential part of your diet, providing variety and crucial nutrients that agriculture alone cannot supply. Around midday, the heat becomes intense. Work in the field stops, and people retreat to the shade of the buildings or into the cool interior rooms. This is a time for rest, for craft work, and for socializing. You spend the afternoon working on pottery. You are making a large storage jar using the coil method. You roll long snakes of clay and coil them up, round and round, to form the vessel's walls. As you work, you carefully smooth and thin the coils, blending them together until the surface is uniform. When the jar is complete and partially dried, you will polish it with a smooth stone, creating a burnished surface. Then you will paint it with a black pigment made from crushed plants mixed with water, creating geometric designs, lines, zigzags, and interlocking patterns that have deep symbolic meaning. Finally, you will fire the pot, probably in an open fire, transforming the soft clay into hard, durable ceramic. As the afternoon fades, you prepare the evening meal. This is cooked in the small room where your family lives. The fire pit in the corner serves for both cooking and warmth. Tonight's meal is simple: a corn gruel, a thick porridge made from the flour you ground this morning, cooked with water and perhaps flavored with wild onions or herbs. There may also be beans, cooked slowly over the fire until soft, and perhaps a small amount of rabbit or other game if the hunters were successful. As darkness falls, the community gathers. The plaza becomes a social space where people tell stories, share news, and maintain the bonds that hold the community together. But the heart of ancestral Puebloan, spiritual and social life is the kiva. Let us enter one of Pueblo Bonito's great kivas, the most sacred spaces in the ancestral Puebloan world. You descend a ladder through the roof, opening into the circular chamber below. The kiva is large, perhaps 60 feet in diameter, and the floor is 12 feet below ground level. The chamber is cool and dim, lit only by a small fire burning in a stone-lined fire pit at the center. The walls are smooth plaster, and the roof above is supported by massive wooden pillars. Around the edge of the chamber is a low bench where people sit during ceremonies. In the floor, between the fire pit and the wall, is a small hole, the sipapu. This is a symbolic opening to the underworld, the place from which the ancestral Puebloans believe their ancestors emerged into this world. The sipapu is a connection to the spirit realm, a reminder that the human world exists in relationship with deeper, unseen forces. Tonight is a ceremony, one of the many rituals that mark the cycles of the year and ensure the continued harmony between the people and the powers that govern the universe. The kiva fills with men, the primary participants in most kiva ceremonies, though women have their own rituals and their own sacred spaces. Everyone is dressed in their finest clothing. Some wear elaborate costumes with masks representing kachinas, spirit beings who serve as intermediaries between humans and gods. The dancers wear kilts woven from cotton, necklaces of shell and turquoise, and headdresses decorated with feathers. The ceremony begins with songs. The voices echo in the circular chamber, accompanied by drums and rattles. The rhythm is hypnotic, repetitive, designed to induce a trance-like state. The masked dancers begin to move, their steps precise and symbolic, telling a story through movement. This might be a prayer for rain, a petition to the storm spirits to send the life-giving water that the crops desperately need. Or it might be a ceremony to ensure a successful hunt, calling on the animal spirits to provide game for the people. Or it might be a ritual of the winter solstice, marking the turning of the year and the return of the sun. The ceremony lasts for hours, deep into the night. There is power here, a sense of connection to something larger than the individual, larger than the community, something ancient and elemental. When you finally climb out of the kiva and return to your room, you feel both exhausted and renewed, part of a tradition that stretches back through countless generations. This is life in Chaco Canyon at its height, a life of hard work, careful management of limited resources, and deep connection to the land and the spiritual forces that govern it. But Chaco Canyon is not the only center of ancestral Puebloan civilization. By the 12th century, the population is spreading and new centers are emerging. One of the most spectacular of these developments is the cliff dwellings. Around 1190 AD, something remarkable happens. Throughout the Four Corners region, people begin to leave their pueblos on the mesa tops and move into the cliff faces. They find natural alcoves, massive overhanging shelters eroded into the sandstone cliffs by thousands of years of water and wind. And in these alcoves, they build new villages. Let us now travel north from Chaco Canyon to Mesa Verde, in what is now southwestern Colorado. Here, the cliffs are riddled with alcoves, and in the largest of these, the Ancestral Puebloans are building their most impressive structures. You are part of a family that has just moved to Cliff Palace, the largest cliff dwelling in North America. The alcove is enormous, a natural shelter more than 300 feet long and 60 feet deep, with a vaulted ceiling rising more than 80 feet above the floor. The alcove provides natural protection from the elements. In summer, the overhang blocks the high sun, keeping the dwellings cool. In winter, the low sun penetrates deep into the alcove, warming the buildings. The alcove also provides protection from rain, snow, and wind. Construction is underway. Men are building walls of carefully shaped sandstone blocks, creating rooms, towers, and kivas within the natural shelter. The stone is quarried from the cliff faces nearby and carried to the site. The builders use stone tools to shape the blocks and wooden scaffolding to reach the higher levels. The result is architecture that seems to grow organically from the rock itself, a seamless blend of natural and human-made elements. Your family's rooms are on the second level, reached by wooden ladders. The rooms are small and dark, but they are well protected and surprisingly comfortable. The temperature inside remains moderate year-round, thanks to the thermal mass of the stone and the protection of the alcove. The cliff dwelling is a complex multi-story structure with more than 150 rooms and 23 kivas. It houses about 100 people, a substantial community living in very close quarters. Privacy is almost non-existent, and cooperation is essential. Life in the cliff dwelling is similar to life in Chaco Canyon, but with some important differences. The fields are on the mesa top above the alcove, reached by precarious hand and toe hold trails carved into the cliff face. Every day, you must make the dangerous climb up or down these trails, carrying water, food, or other goods. It is hard, dangerous work, and fatal falls are not uncommon. But the cliff dwellings offer significant advantages. They are incredibly defensible. The only access is via the ladders and trails, which can be removed or blocked in case of attack. An enemy would have an almost impossible task trying to assault a cliff dwelling. This defensive advantage suggests that by the late 1100s, conflict and violence were becoming serious concerns. Why the move to cliff dwellings? Archaeologists debate this question. The defensive position suggests warfare or raiding was a problem. There is evidence of increasing violence in the archaeological record from this period. Burned villages, bodies showing signs of violent death, and the defensive nature of the cliff dwellings themselves. But there may be other factors as well. Perhaps the cliff dwellings were prestigious locations chosen for religious or social reasons. Perhaps they were simply practical, providing better protection from the weather. Or perhaps, as some evidence suggests, the climate was becoming more challenging and people were adapting by finding the most sheltered locations. For a time, life in the cliff dwellings flourishes. The community is vibrant, the ceremonies continue, and the crops, though increasingly unpredictable, still provide enough food to survive. But then, in the mid-12th century, everything begins to fall apart. The first warning signs are subtle. The summer rains become less reliable. Some years bring drought, the crops wither in the fields, and the stored food from previous years must be consumed. The people pray for rain, perform their ceremonies with renewed fervor, but the skies remain stubbornly clear. Tree ring studies, which allow scientists to reconstruct ancient climate patterns, show that the period from 1276 to 1299 AD was one of the worst droughts in the past 2,000 years. The drought was not continuous, but it was severe and prolonged. Year after year, the rains failed. The springs and seeps that provided drinking water began to dry up. The fields produced smaller and smaller harvests. The wild plants that people depended on for supplemental food became scarce. Game animals, also stressed by the drought, moved away or died. Hunger becomes a constant companion. The stored food runs out. People begin to eat seed corn, the grain that should have been saved for next year's planting. A desperate act that dooms future harvests. Children, the most vulnerable, begin to die. Skeletal remains from this period show signs of severe malnutrition, stunted growth, bone lesions, and other markers of chronic hunger. But the drought is not the only problem. There is growing evidence of environmental degradation. After more than 1,000 years of occupation, the ancestral Puebloans have dramatically altered their landscape. The forests, already sparse in this arid region, have been heavily exploited. Trees were cut for roof beams, firewood, and to clear land for farming. By the 1200s, the people must travel farther and farther to find suitable timber. Without trees, the soil erodes more easily. The careful systems of terraces and check dams begin to fail. Flash floods tear through the arroyos, carrying away topsoil and making agriculture even more difficult. Erosion causes the arroyos to cut deeper into the landscape, lowering the water table and making it harder for crops to access underground moisture. Game is also scarce. Centuries of hunting have reduced populations of deer, bighorn sheep, and other large animals. The people turn increasingly to smaller game like rabbits and rodents, but these provide less nutrition and require more effort to catch. As resources dwindle, competition increases. There is evidence of rising violence. Some sites show signs of cannibalism, a deeply controversial topic, but one supported by archaeological evidence at certain locations. Bones have been found that were broken open to extract marrow, burned, and scattered in ways that suggest they were processed as food. Whether this was ritual cannibalism, violence between groups, or starvation-driven desperation remains debated. What is clear is that this was a time of tremendous stress and social breakdown. Villages are attacked and burned. Bodies are left unburied, a profound violation of normal practices. Some defensive walls and towers show evidence of hasty construction, suggesting people were fortifying their homes in fear. The social fabric that held the ancestral Puebloan world together begins to tear. As conditions worsen, people make a fateful decision. They will leave. By 1280 AD, the migrations have begun. Families pack their few possessions, take whatever food they can carry, and abandon their homes. They leave behind everything that is too heavy or cumbersome to transport. Pottery, grinding stones, tools, and the massive stone buildings that had been the work of generations. The cliff dwellings fall silent. The great houses stand empty. The kivas no longer echo with songs and ceremonies. Where did they go? The ancestral Puebloans did not vanish. They migrated, moving south and east, seeking regions where water was more reliable. Many moved to the Rio Grande Valley in what is now New Mexico, where the permanent river provided a more stable water source. Others moved south toward the Little Colorado River and other drainages. They joined with other groups already living in these regions, blending their traditions and creating new communities. The modern Pueblo peoples of New Mexico and Arizona, including the Hopi, Zuni, Acoma, and the Pueblos of the Rio Grande, are the direct descendants of the Ancestral Puebloans. They have oral traditions that speak of migrations from the north, of leaving the old places and coming to new homes. They still tell stories of their ancestors who lived in the cliff dwellings and the great houses. But the Four Corners region, the heartland of ancestral Puebloan civilization, was abandoned. For the first time in more than 1,000 years, there were no permanent human settlements in Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, or the other great centers. The population collapse was dramatic. Perhaps 20,000 to 30,000 people left the region over the course of a few decades. When Spanish explorers arrived in the southwest in the 16th century, they found the ruins, but no people. The pueblos they encountered were far to the south and east. The Navajo and Apache, Athabascan-speaking peoples who had migrated into the region from the north, sometime after the ancestral Puebloans left, called the ruins the Anasazi, meaning ancient enemies or ancient ones, depending on the translation. The name stuck, though many modern descendants prefer Ancestral Puebloans, a term that emphasizes continuity rather than separation. For centuries, the cliff dwellings and great houses stood empty, slowly deteriorating. Then, in the late 19th century, they were rediscovered by Anglo-American explorers, cowboys, and eventually archaeologists. The discovery of Mesa Verde's spectacular cliff dwellings in 1888 captured public imagination. Tourists began to visit, unfortunately often looting pottery and artifacts. In 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt established Mesa Verde as a national park, protecting it for future generations. Today, Mesa Verde, Chaco Canyon, and dozens of other ancestral Puebloan sites are preserved and studied. Modern archaeology, using techniques like tree ring dating, ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis, and detailed skeletal studies, continues to reveal new information about these remarkable people, but many mysteries remain. We still debate the exact reasons for the abandonment. Was it primarily the drought, environmental degradation, warfare, a combination of all three? Or were there other factors we haven't yet identified? We don't fully understand the religious beliefs and practices of the ancestral Puebloans. We can see the artifacts and the architecture, but the meaning behind them is often lost. We know they had complex cosmologies, but without written records, we must piece together their worldview from material remains and the traditions of their descendants. We don't know the details of their social organization. Who held power? How were decisions made? What were the relationships between the great houses and the smaller communities? These questions remain partially answered. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not why they left, but how they managed to survive for so long in such a challenging environment. For more than 1,000 years, the ancestral Puebloans carved out a life in one of the harshest landscapes in North America. They built magnificent structures, created beautiful art, and developed sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, agriculture, and architecture. They adapted, innovated, and persevered through countless challenges. The fact that they eventually left does not diminish their achievements. It reminds us that even the most successful adaptations have limits. that human societies are vulnerable to environmental change, and that sometimes survival means having the wisdom to move on. The story of the Ancestral Puebloans is not a story of disappearance. It is a story of migration, adaptation, and survival. The people did not vanish. They moved, changed, and became the Pueblo peoples of today, who still live in the Southwest, who still practice ceremonies and kivas, who still grow corn, beans, and squash, and who still remember the ancient ones who came before. The cliff dwellings still stand, tucked into their sandstone alcoves, silent witnesses to a vanished way of life. You can visit them today, walk through the empty rooms, climb down into the kivas, and stand in the plazas where ceremonies were once performed. The buildings are empty, but they are not truly abandoned. They are still sacred to the Pueblo peoples, still part of their history and identity. When you stand in Cliff Palace or Pueblo Bonito, you are standing in a place that represents both an ending and a continuity. An ending of a particular way of life, a particular adaptation to a particular landscape, but also a continuity because the people who built these structures still exist. Their culture and traditions still alive, adapted and changed, but unbroken. The Ancestral Puebloans remind us that human societies are resilient, but not invincible. They remind us that our relationship with the environment is complex and consequential. They remind us that sometimes the greatest act of survival is knowing when to change, when to leave behind what we have built, and when to move forward to new challenges and new opportunities. And they remind us that even in the harshest environments, humans can create beauty, meaning, and monuments that endure long after the builders have gone. The mysterious disappearance of the Anasazi is, in the end, not so mysterious after all. It is a story we can understand of people facing challenges we still face today. Drought, resource depletion, environmental degradation, and social stress. It is a story of how people responded to those challenges, sometimes successfully, sometimes tragically, but always with ingenuity and determination. And it is a story that is still being told, still being discovered, still revealing its secrets to those who take the time to listen to the silent stones and the voices of the descendants who carry the memory of the ancient ones. And so our journey through the world of the Ancestral Puebloans comes to a close. We have walked through their dwellings, witnessed their struggles, and pondered the mystery of their migration. It has been a true pleasure to be your guide through this remarkable chapter of American history. Thank you for listening. Until our next journey into the past, I wish you a calm and peaceful night.